Thank you all for coming. My name is Jovana Stokic, and I'm an art historian at Curator. And I have a pleasure to introduce a panel on art and sustainability. And I wanted to have a funny title. I want to, to make you interested and come here. But I'll read you what I wanted to say. But before I start, I wanted to introduce you our panelists. Doreen Remen could not be here, but we have Kathy Batista, Dr. Kathy Batista, who is a director of contemporary art at Sotheby's Art Institute. Then Brian Tolle, the artist, here, also represented in Miami. You will see his work. And Raphael Castoriano, art advisor and the founder of Kreemart, and you'll hear about Kreemart. But now, let me read you from my BlackBerry, but I'm not reading you my email, I'm reading you what I wrote about this. So it's not like I'm, browsing through emails while I'm moderating the panel. This notion of art and sustainability came up to me because we are in the middle of the art fair, and this is part of the ecosystem of the art world, very important part of it. And what's sustainability in this context? Can we translate that notion? And I wanted to say, I wanted to ask a couple of questions related to this concept. Is it possible to say that sustainable art is an oxymoron, given today currently disruptive relationship between art world's complex systems, art market on the one side and art production? So this is a provocative question I want to ask, especially when we are talking today, when people are buying and selling. What's sustainable? What does it mean sustainable in these categories? So following the logic of current thoughts on ecology, I'm using ecology as a model of thinking. Regard to contemporary unsustainability of life. So it's a mouthful, but I'm trying to say unsustainability of life, meaning that life cannot be preserved as we continue like this. It can be said that art is ultimately unsustainable if these models are corrupted. Let's use that word. So I am trying to put the focus of this panel to have different insights on state of art production and consumption. What else? So my question is, what are the possibilities of creating connections in art production and consumption that mimic sustainable economy of both production and consumption? So can we make that translation, or is this model viable or not? What you said, like if sustainability is then viability. And then I have a specific model for it, and I want to look at it through case studies of ephemeral art. This is what I am interested as a curator of performance art and working in a non-profit organization that has to deal with these, cruel realities of finding models to stay in the art. So, of course, ephemeral art and happenings and performance art, this second half of the 20th century, offered a perspective that disrupted this one-way channel of production and consumption. We are aware of it. But we are looking at the notions of sustainability today, specifically. Is it possible, and I'm trying to translate it. I'm not taking this ecological paradigm rigidly. But, is it possible to have art that is locally produced and consumed, but it's not provincialized? So what does it mean, global versus local, if we think about locally grown food and, for example, that model? Is this equivalent of green art or organic art? I mean, does that sound familiar, or is it a corrupted model of, of a provincial local art that is all monoculture, basically? The second question is what about art that is employing or using practices of repurposing? I think that's an interesting question, and I would love to ask my panelists and of course audience to think about, what about reappropriation or repurposing or these ecological model? And of course, I think about digital art. Is this the only art that went green today? What about that? What about dissemination? Think about, not only production and consumption, but think about, presence in digital world now when we will have very soon VIP fair that will happen only in virtual space. And that's bring me to another question, and that's pollution in the art world. And I would love to, this is, my favorite question. So these are just, some models to think about the nexus between art and ecology, but also we will talk about specific examples. And I want to finish with asking this panel to just start this conversation of negotiation of consumption that is, I think the crucial thing is this direct access, not only to the art world, but also to knowledge. So can this paradigm or personification of green in art using natural resources of creativity, enthusiasm, can that be a viable model to rethink these connections? So I'm just asking about that. And just to remind you, to give you the definition of sustainability, it's a mouthful, I'm sorry how I pronounce it, but it is in its basic meaning capacity to endure. And that's why I think it's a very good word to use, although it's a rather long one. And it's not only related to biological systems that need to sustain in order to, but also when we think about our own lives as humans, this potential for long-term maintenance and well-being, not only the life itself. So this notion of sustainability, this capacity to endure, became a wide-ranging term, and it's, as it is applied to every system, I believe that it can be applied also here. So this is the beginning of discussion, and you will not hear that many words from me anymore, because I really want to hear other people who has so much to say about it. So Kathy Battista is such an interesting thinker and a practitioner, a scholar who is not, how can I say, not wary of really dealing with art practices and finding ways how to make things in motion. And I heard about you a long time ago when I haven't met you, and that was the project that you did in London Art Angel, the public art agency you started. And I think at its core it has the way of setting things in motion in a rather unique way. I'm not asking you to talk only about this. And I am cutting bio, and I'm asking you to look for Katie's publications also, which I think is, but I want to start right in the middle, and I want to let you talk a little bit more about this,
Okay.
Kathy. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Good, okay, just shout if you can. Well, I think it's such an interesting panel to happen here, and when Jovana asked me to participate, I thought, what is sustainability? And the first thing I thought was art and sustainability, they're diametrically opposed concepts. So it was interesting that you said oxymoron, because it was the first thing that came to me was this opposition, and the fact that I think the notion of sustainability in art isn't necessarily a natural discussion unless you're talking about traditional conservation methods. So I also tried to think about different paradigms of sustainability, and for me, of course, there's the ecological, the carbon footprint of this fair I would hate to think of. And I mean, I'm guilty. I run a master's program where I take 70 students around the world. We go to the Middle East. So I'm just as guilty as anyone else. But when I started to think about the ecological effects of the fair and what the carbon blueprint to be offsetted would have been, it kind of did boggle me. But for me, I think I'm less interested in the ecological approach, and I'm more interested in the sustainability of artworks themselves and the notion of the ephemeral, very similar to Jovana. I think that there is also this kind of paradigm of, that you see more in, say, African contemporary art, people like El Anatsui, with recycling, and even with some designers, like Michael Marriott in the United Kingdom. And then Jovana mentioned Art Angel, which I actually I created a program there. It was founded by people many years before me, but I founded a program there that was contextual and spin-off projects, but everything we did were major monumental projects with often quite prestigious artists, shall we say, or big names, people like Tony Ausler or Ilya Emilio Kabakov, but they were all ephemeral. Nothing lasted. And I think that the next paradigm of sustainability for me, teaching and probably in writing, is just the idea of the sustainability of each artwork in itself, and how the notion of that is kind of outdated. When I walk around the fair, in particular this fair, I see a lot of big works, a lot of two-dimensional work. It seems very safe to me. And one of the things I'm most interested in is performance, ephemeral events, ephemeral art. And I think, as Jovana said, since the 1960s, since the second half of the 20th century, the whole notion of permanence in art has been, of course, absolutely challenged. And even people who made sculptural works, such as Eva Hesse or Dan Flavin, there are all these really interesting conversations going on about, do we let them die, or do we remake the latex? Do we replant? Do we replug in a new light bulb? And it's interesting that Tanya Barson was sitting in this chair before me from Tate, because they had a very interesting example of a Joseph Beuys felt suit that was eaten by a moth, part of it. And the whole idea was, do we still consider that a work of art, or is it damaged now? So I think those are interesting concepts. But for me, I think sustainability, the kind of things I think about mostly in my writing and my teaching, is related to performance and more ephemeral works. So I'm very interested in feminist art in the UK, and I worked a lot with artists who said that they specifically didn't document the work because they wanted it to be a fleeting moment. And it's so different now, of course, but this concept that you had to be there. And I think there's something very precious about the fleeting. If you think about even a sunset, the sun sets every day, but there's something so beautiful about sitting and watching it because we know it's not going to be there in 2 minutes. So there's something about being in the moment that makes that kind of art so interesting. Now, the next kind of stage of my thinking goes to the market, and how these practices, which were once perhaps on the margin, are now in the center. So if you look around the fair, you'll see many things that are interpretations of performance or documentation. People like Marina Abramovic, of course, Vanessa Beecroft, Patty Chang, there's a huge list, who now, we've gotten to this age of hyper-documentation. Everything is documented. This is being documented in probably 3 different formats. So this idea of documentation for me is there's a binary, because half of it is, well, aren't we patient enough to just sit there and be there and just experience it and not have to watch a video of it or a relay of it on YouTube? But the other thing that I think, to be less cynical, is that the documentation in some cases offers a new being or a new medium for the performance, and does let it live, and actually increases sustainability in one sense of an artwork. I think some of the interesting things that are going on now, I would say 2 interesting kind of strands that I've seen lately. Number one is the digital. I think, Jovana, you're absolutely right about, we have the VIP Art Fair in January. We have the Adobe Museum, which is the first digital venue. And the whole concept of digitization of archives. I mean, when I was doing my master's and PhD, it was so hard to see things like a Carolee Schneemann video of a performance, and now you can go onto YouTube or Ubu, and you can just find these things, which is kind of incredible in one way. In another way, it kind of misses that romantic or fleeting side of it. I think the digital as a venue for works of art and as a place for things to live on instead of storage in a warehouse somewhere is going to be huge in the future. And I think there will be more digital museums, such as the Adobe Museum. And if you haven't seen that yet, I mean, I don't work for Adobe, but go online and check it out because it's amazing. And Tony Ausler is the first artist, Tom Eccles curated it. I think that, though, the second thing that I see in regards to sustainability and the moment is artists interested again in things that aren't so sustainable and using really throwaway materials and using video that's, homemade, scratch, and this kind of resistance against the hyper-documented and technology. And in New York, we had a couple of exhibitions recently, Younger Than Jesus last year and Greater New York this year, and there was quite a prevalence of artists just making things that weren't precious. And so I think that idea of things made out of paper or videos made, very scrappily, not this high production Doug Aitken kind of, which I have no problem with. But I think the idea that now maybe younger artists are challenging some of that hyper kind of physical big art.
Permanent,
big, costly. But maybe, maybe that's just what I like and what I look for. But I think definitely what I think is also the second, I'll just leave with this thought, is that if you think about the history of how history is written, it was usually written by a curator or the producer or a publisher. There were people that kept the lock and key on information and on events, and we saw the world through their view. But now we have this proliferation that everybody can document and everybody can upload. So I think it's going to be really interesting to go into the future in a sense with a much more pluralistic sense of authorship. So for me, that's going to be interesting with the idea of sustainability and the art world and what is sustained, because I think maybe more will be sustained.
Thank you, Kathy. And we just continue with Brian Tolle. Can we have a video? Can we have images now? Oh, not that one, the other one. Mm-hmm. This is not Brian.
No, that's Los Carpinteros.
Brian Tolle, we have so little time, so without further ado, you want to talk about your newest project that can be seen here.
Certainly.
Please.
Well, I'm someone who started making installations within the gallery museum context. And oftentimes those installations challenge the commodification of the artwork because the installation itself was viewed at one moment in its entirety. But if it were to become commoditized, it had to be broken up, and it would take a tremendous amount of effort to reassemble the experience that was once had within the space of the gallery. I've since been asked to make works in public spaces, the first of which was for the Public Art Fund with Tom Eccles, called The Witch Catcher. It was a monumental architectural work that cost about $10,000 to produce. It was made in my studio, and it was exhibited at the Metrotech Center and in City Hall Park for about 2 or 3 months, and then disappeared to the vestige of history. I was recently meaning 5 years ago, invited to design a work for Miami Beach in the Collins Park, a newly renovated space. And each time I get involved with a public project, I don't limit myself to a specific aesthetic that I've developed over time. I immerse myself in the specific culture and develop a language that's suitable for the space. We all know that Miami Beach is a recreational center, a place where people come for relaxing, fun, sun, boating. And so that aesthetic was what initiated this project. We also have this ecological factor that every once in a while disturbs our fun and games, called hurricanes. And so it seemed to me an appropriate pairing between the fun and sun and the ominous threat of the hurricane that might at any time pass through this place. So I produced a work for Collins Park called Tempest. This is the original artist rendering for Tempest, the piece on the left. Now, I use any medium, any form, ultimately to express a work of art. And so in the early days, I worked with paper mache and plaster, and now I'm using digital technologies to express forms that weren't achievable previously. So this is an early rendering of the Tempest project that's currently on view. Now, what you're looking at is a wave algorithm. My studio developed technology using technologies developed for films like The Perfect Storm. So wave algorithms that were designed for 2D presentation in cinema, we figured out how to translate those forms into 3D algorithms in real time, real space, in 3 dimensions. That's achieved by creating wave algorithms that are run in the forms of animation. So this is a moving object within the space of the computer. And at a certain point in time, as the animations evolve over many months, perhaps even years, a frozen moment is extracted. That frozen moment is then carved into a mold in 3 dimensions and then cast in fiberglass resin. So the fact that this thing looks so animated is because its generation was through the form of animation.
If the
Yeah.
cost $10,000.
The cost is no longer $10,000. But
Talking about sustainable.
Yes.
well, let's put it this way. It took us the budget for this project was about $350,000. It took us 5 years to produce. I probably lost about $50,000. That said, talking about the issue of sustainability, this piece really is on the cutting edge of a hands-on physical model. That is to say that certain pieces of the project are very labor-intensive and physically made, rolled aluminum, plasma-cut aluminum. But this form, this digital form, exists permanently on the record. And as this piece ages over time, if there should be some kind of damage or vandalism, the piece can be replaced very, very easily and very cost-effectively. No one panel is the same. There are 28 panels that make up this project. The project is illuminated from the inside at night using very low wattage LEDs. This is a day view. And so during the day, the reflective surfaces of the wave algorithm are quite dominant and very fluid, as you can see. And at night, the lights come on from within. Now, one of the most difficult things, bridging the gap between gallery practice or museum presentation and public practice, is the audience grows exponentially. And it's a real challenge for those of us who bridge these two worlds to make work that is critically satisfying. That is to say that my critical audience appreciates the intention, but that is not evasive or arrogant toward public viewing. So my goal is always to try to produce something that is going to be compelling and alluring to the public, but is also going to be critically appreciated by my colleagues. Another view from night view, and a view from on top of one of the local hotels. Did I run out of time? Or is
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you did. Thank you for please go and check it out in the park, the Tempest. But third person, more videos. We need to finish soon, and you
All
saw
right,
this image.
first,
Raphael Castoriano will talk about Kreemart and direct access to art and ways of sustaining ephemeral performances, and you will introduce the artists also.
Yes, here are my sustainable, those Carpinteros who are here sitting with us. They came late, so I guess they didn't let them sit here, but thank you for coming. And they are here in Miami not only for Kreemart, but they came to launch their book, which is fantastic. And can you tell me when they're going to launch their book?
So we're plugging in more sustainable models. Like when
Yeah.
artists come here, they have to multitask. So
Right.
if they want to do a performance, they have something else, and they are also doing the booth. See how this works in the ecosystem of the art world. You can see their work at the booth at Sean Kelly, but the book launch is tomorrow. But the book is a very important publication, first on this scale for the artist, by Thyssen-Bornemisza Institute, and the book launch is tomorrow at 5 here, and right at 5 o'clock, at 6 p.m. tomorrow. You can buy the book and hear more about it, but you will hear now about their first performance ever. And first visit to Miami, and I think that's also important. We'll ask them later, but this was the performance, Brazo Gitano.
Exactly. This is, it happened yesterday at CIFO. So basically Kreemart started from an idea. I was very bored being in a dinner, all these museum dinners we go, and I had the idea for the Tate, which I belong to the US patrons, to have the artists create their own cake. And so this is how it started to be sustainable. And Gadamer with Reza Farkun, they did a video and then went on to create an artwork which they showed in the gallery, and that's how things started to happen. So very important here is that all of you that were there yesterday, you had a taste of the Brazo Gitano, which was in a butcher shop, clandestine, and we had to serve all these guests and our clients. They had to take a little number and have a taste of that. So when you taste something that's ephemeral, obviously you think that that cake is a piece of meat, but it was very good, and it had some guava mixed with strawberry and fruits that the chef David Schwarten did for Los Carpinteros. There you see the meat again. And well, it got a little bit wild. And I guess the ending was that they had to clean, I don't know, I don't see. Well, they had to clean the shop and burn the uniforms that were contaminated so there wouldn't be any trace of what happened there. So again, no trace, no sustainability, yes or not. So my idea is that, you know, these artists are, I'm an art advisor, so I have sold works of them, but they're also friends, and there is a gap, like Brian said, between the galleries, the commercial phase, and what, like he said, he lost money on that sculpture, and artists have another world that we all think it's, you know, very related to their artwork that's exposed here, which is very clean and beautiful, but they really want to have contact with their public. So Kreemart gives that taste in their mouth, and then it lets them create whatever happens. So is this work of art sustainable? Maybe, because people are going to take a piece of paper, a souvenir, a documentation of what happened there, and keep it and sell it or do whatever. That's when they enter the other side of the fence with Kreemart and the artist. Or the artists themselves will create a work of art which will then be sustainable within the history of art.
But it's
So
wonderful.
that's it.
I really think, Kathy, you wanted to say something, but I wanted to interject. What does it stay? Does it that taste in the mouth stay longer than everything else? Because, you know, it goes through us, and that's something that cannot be sold and cannot be bought. Is that something that maybe we're looking for as a new model? You know, it does not have to be taste. It can be just, you know, like thinking about, you know, like, but please, yes.
I was just going to say it's so brilliant because it implicates the viewer. which is so hard. You know, I think, I don't know, I'm not an artist, but I would guess the one thing that your main goal is to make some kind of communication with a viewer that lasts more than 2 seconds walking by a work. You know, artists put 3 years into making a sculpture and someone walks right by it. And I love what you guys have done, because it, you know, it kind of implicates someone. They're in it, they're eating it. And I guess then shitting it out, which is brilliant. It's a brilliant kind of anarchic, you know.
Are we done? Should we
Are we done? Do we
continue?
have time for questions? We have time for some
Yes.
questions. One question. How democratic? We have only one question
Well,
allowed.
3.
3, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, we keep it short, please.
Yeah, James Draper from Providence. I just want to throw, in my naivety, throw a question out. Do you not believe that digital art is probably the most unsustainable art in the context of greening? If it's digital art, the medium that you have to use, or the media you have to use to access digital art, you have to have computer, a television, a monitor. You have, so I'm only talking about the greening or the ecological portion of the art. Is not digital media the most unsustainable thing? The art that Brian does and that you were talking about, to me, those are ephemeral. The pieces are literally consumed and they're gone. And talk about organic, like young lady talked about here. Anyway, my point is just digital art, I don't buy it as sustainable. Your opening gambit was it was the most. I think it's the least sustainable.
There you go. I opened it as a question, so there
Very
is a
good.
solid no. Another question. I have nothing to add to this, but another question, please. No questions?
But I think, can I just add one
Please,
thing
yes,
to that?
of course.
I think what you're saying is absolutely a vital part of the argument. And for me, it's like kind of saying, you know, I'm not going to wear Nike shoes because they, you know, they have slave labor in Tunisia and Indonesia. I mean, if it's so hard to, where do you draw the line, you know? And I, for one, am all for art's sake. I think artists should be able to do what they want to do. I personally am not interested in giant Richard Serra sculptures because it's not my thing. You know, I'm much more interested in ephemeral. But I do think your point is an interesting one and a problematic one. And I think what will be interesting to see is something like the VIP art fair, to see if it really works. Because I would think even with all the electricity and computers that the carbon footprint would be less than something
Right,
like this.
right.
But it will be interesting to see if people want that, because part of this is the experience, is the being here and seeing people and seeing celebrities and the social part of it. I mean, not necessarily for all of us, but I think that some collectors, you know, that's part of it, is being here. So I'm really interested in what happens with this VIP art fair.
So this is the question, what's the lesser evil, I think. That's what we can ask.
Yeah.
I see like you're nodding. That means okay.
But if I could just follow up one quick point.
Yes,
Yeah.
please, Brian.
I think that there is a real challenge, because we all spend so much time looking at digital imagery. We spend so much time in our computers. And I think, you know, eating a piece of cake or touching a piece of sculpture or walking through something or watching a sunset, as you said, these are becoming more and more rarefied experiences. And we all know that there's a point at which that interface with that world, as expansive as it can be, it's not the same thing as actually having a real experience, really touching, really tasting, really fucking.
That's true.
That's a good way to end. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of the fair. Thanks.
Thank you.